We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us for the December program here at Thomas Welch Library, The Secret Life of Paper with Tammy Tran. But before I introduce our speaker, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. This class is being recorded, so for you in person, just know that we are recording this class. You're not going to be on video, but your voice will be. Also, we have bathrooms in the back if you need it, and a water fountain as well. And then Tammy has indicated that she's okay with questions coming out throughout her presentation. So feel free to raise your hand. And then for our virtual audience, I'm going to be your moderator. So please feel free to enter any questions in the chat and I will relay them to Tammy. Now, Tammy is our curator of manuscripts and archives, and she's been with the library for about a year and is a fantastic addition to the team. She's also an adjunct professor of art history with the Nova Northern Virginia Community College. So this topic is very well known to her, so I hope you all enjoy it.
Yeah. So hello, and I mentioned I'm Tammy Tran. And yeah, so my formal training has been in art history, specifically in global encounters and in cultural heritage information science. And I'm really happy to be here today to talk about paper, this medium. And yeah, so actually, this is my first time teaching here. So you all are going to be in my core memory. So yeah, welcome. So hopefully this presentation is interesting. It's more like an intro to the history of paper, following its trail throughout time, and then just basic tips on maybe like caring for paper or just being more aware of how to handle them, especially if we want to preserve them for a long time. So I usually do that with my students. I always think about the objectives, like things that might come out. So intro history of paper, I might add in some stories like folklore, narratives, things that were passed down paper trails. We're going to see how it goes from Asia into Europe, and then basic preservation. So part one, history of paper. Things I like to start out with is the concept of it. And actually, Umberto Eco, he actually wrote something when they had an opening for the Alexandria Library. So there are three types of memory. So there's one that he mentions. The first one is organic, which is a memory made of flesh and blood, and the one administered by our brain. The second one is mineral. So things that were used by humankind to make, for instance, memory represented in clay, on stone. So, and then the third one is, he calls it the vegetable one, which is basically papyruses and paper. And I think the reason why I like this quote is because it really talks about the function of paper being that part of the human experience to record things. And so that's what I like to always like bring that up, is because how did we as human beings come to interact with paper, come to create it, and come to use it for like thousands of years now? So how much do we really know about paper? I think this is the interactive part. Like, what do we actually know about it? How often do we use it? Every day, right? Even though we're in the digital age, we're still using so much paper. And I think it's because it's a tactile element and we can't help but just like grab a piece of paper, jot down our notes, print something out, something physical, something tangible that relates to our mind once more. So here is a depiction. So basically, we're going to talk a little bit about this too, is that here on the screen is paper from the 14th century into the 19th century. And we'll actually see how it evolves, the conditions of it, and the ingredients to make those types of paper. But it all starts here. I think because we're actually at a genealogy and local history paper, let's talk about our ancestors a little bit. Like, what did we use pre-paper, right? So first one, clay tablets. The Sumerians used clay tablets to carve into clay, their cuneiform, which is their form of writing. Then we also have stone, bones and shell were also very common. Like for instance, in Asia, we actually used it to record government materials as well as oracles relating to deities. Bamboo is also another one where it's one of the earlier forms of creating scrolls. And we also have papyrus ancient Egyptian writing material. It is paper-like, but it's not paper, by the way. It's because the way it's being processed. We'll talk a little bit about that. And honestly, any other type of surfaces. Silk was also used as a writing platform, vellum and parchment, which we'll also talk briefly about. So I thought I'd show a couple examples right over here. Tortoise shells, clay tablets. That's actually an oxen bone, part of the shoulder, and then Rosetta Stone right over here, so stone. What do you all think about this as a writing material? Is it portable? Challenging. Yeah, very, yeah. It's so challenging. Can you imagine carrying that? Can you carry that? But we as human beings are recording things regardless, right? But it's just like one of those things like prior to paper, this is the medium. Here's other ones. So this is actually silk. And then this is papyrus on the bottom and parchment on top. So it all starts with this person, or I'm going to use him as a starting point. All right, is anyone familiar with this eunuch? It's a court official in China. So his name is Tai Lung. So he is considered as the inventor of paper in China in 105 CE. So he was born roughly between 50 to 62 CE. We're not entirely sure. He dies in 121 CE. Actually, his death was pretty tragic. But because he was considered the inventor in China, like literally, they made a temple for him. So printmakers, paper makers over time have actually come and praised him. But the interesting about him is that this is kind of the starting point to the story of how paper was quote unquote created, is that so he later on works in the palace. He ends up climbing the social ladder of the hierarchy working in the palace, and he ends up being he basically manages the palace workshop where they make ceremonial weapons as well as other crafts. And the story goes is that one day he's observing his surrounding. Does anyone know about paper wasp? And so there's this famous quote, nature is the greatest teacher. So according to the story, he was basically wandering around and he was by a water area. Some sources say pool, some sources say pond. And he's just noticing these wasps, they're making their nests. And if you look at it, look at the texture of it. It looks soft. It looks like kind of like paper. That's why they're called paper wasps too. But he noticed the structure and he takes a piece of it and he takes it back to his workshop. And he actually used ink and he basically writes something on it. And he noticed that the way it absorbs the ink, it wasn't bleeding through too much. It wasn't too blotchy. He's thinking maybe I could do something with that. So that's according to the story. And what he knows is that the wasp is grabbing organic materials from other places and they're chewing it and they spit it out to create that wasp. So he's thinking, okay, how does that play? And back then, even making clothes, right, we're beating the cloth, cotton, linen, things like that. So, and how silk was being made too, there was a correlation and connection to what he can do with this experiment. So he started experimenting with his team, and soon what comes out of it is an assembly line. So this picture is not as clear, but we'll start with the first part here. Harvesting the material. So they're starting with mulberry bark, hemp, certain rags, they're harvesting it. And they're gonna also strip the outer part of the material. And then next is they're gonna cook it. They actually soak the fiber of the plants for a while. Then they're cooking it. They're gonna boil it down. And after that, they're gonna beat it to basically a pulp.
What is the plant? Sorry.
Oh, mulberry is one of the, yeah. So he used mulberry first. And I know there's other things too. They talked about hemp. They talked about there's this other type of fiber called glass. And then rags. They're also using recycling old textile materials as well. Sorry. And the next part is screening it. So once they soak it into the water, this is how paper is different from papyrus, is a suspension of water. So you have this screen, you put the pulp on it and you dip it into the water, you pull it back up, and as the water is being drained, the fiber, it's leveling down. They're gonna basically start latching onto each other as it dries. Once it dries, they peel it off from the mat and they're going to stick it against a surface. Oftentimes they have like a wall. They stick it on there and then they dry it and they peel it off and it becomes paper. Yeah.
You mentioned ink, that he was already using ink. Were they using it with silk, with fabrics?
Yeah.
Or things?
Yeah, they were using ink. Yeah. So they would use ink on the silk, and sometimes it bleeds through, and they have to think about all the consistency of that too. And it gets pretty. It's because it's not as consistent, so they were also struggling with it. So you have to use very fine paint brushes, like steady hand, all those things. And then you mess it up, and silk is also expensive and also labor intensive. So it's like, oh no. So that's the reason why I think people start thinking, what else can we use? What else can we use?
Did they use parchment or vellum?
Not in Asia at this time. Parchment and vellum was mainly more in Europe. Yeah. So this is just another image I thought would be easier to see. Like, this is what we kind of do. Like, if you're doing DIY or making your own handmade paper, you have the screen. But this is an illustration right over here, is that the plant fibers are attaching itself again. And we're going to talk about why that's so important later on about preservation. It's because as these fibers break down, that is how your paper gets more brittle over time. Yeah.
How did it come to be called paper?
Oh, that's a good one. I actually don't know the etymology of it, but in Chinese we call it 字, right? So it's interesting, even though it says paper was invented in 105, but we actually have records even 2 centuries before that was already using that word. So it's like, so we do, like, based on historians and what we have discovered so far, we do believe paper has actually existed even before then, but the unit was actually standardizing a process, is what we believe. But I thought to visualize it a little bit better, I have this, I already actually have the video up and I forgot. Let me just hold it. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, any questions so far about the process? Hopefully that gives you the visual aid to how paper is being made. So with that in mind, China ends up producing a lot of paper after that. It doesn't suddenly change society day and night though. Like, just because they finally found a standardized way to make paper, it will still take time for people to use it. So still overlapping, we're still using bamboo screws, oracle bones and things like that. But I did bring some mulberry paper. So it's very thin, right? It takes time. So this is definitely more modernized, but they would, you would have to sand it down at some point and then just basically get it onto smooth. So this is one of the earlier ones, around 205 CE. So about like almost 100 years after Ceylon standardized the process. And this is actually the very first sutra book that's printed on a mass scale, the Diamond Sutra. So this is actually around closer to, I believe, Tang Dynasty, but I might be wrong with which dynasty, but it was definitely a few centuries after the first one. But you can see these are the thin papers, and it does hold the ink well. And that's one of the key things that they were trying to also do. So with that in mind, despite historians crediting the invention of paper to the year 105, we actually found a lot of primary sources before that. So I do want to point it out because I think this is the fun part, where you find the nitty-gritty of all the records. Like, for instance, dictionaries, you see the word paper already being used before that. And one of my favorites, like in 93 BCE, an imperial guard asked a prince to cover his nose with paper. There's also a bunch of medical treatises where they talk about wrapping poison with paper too. So obviously there was something being created that's very either paper or paper-like to use in everyone's daily life. Another one, of course, that rarely comes to mind, but I had a lot of fun with, is toilet paper. So I had a lot of fun because I learned that there were certain papers, like hemp paper base is a little bit more coarse. There were stories that were alluded to people using toiletry materials even before that. And one specific one is his name is Yan Shidoi. So basically, he was a scholar, and before he died, he instructed his household exactly what kind of paper to use for very specific reasons. And he literally said, "Do not use this paper for toilet. Do not use this to do your business." And in fact, even if it's recycled, even if you're reusing it, if it's already written on with like the five classics, which is if you come from a Confucian household, you read the five classics. It's about poetry, moral, social, obligations, things like that, right? It's like, don't even use it for your business. And he passes away. And that was like one of his last instructions. And I always thought that was really funny because it just shows that functionality again that we're yearning for, that we use. And once again, I also found narratives that kind of push for the production of paper. Paper money. This is one of China's paper money. So oddly enough, China was one of the first ones to print paper money, but it was actually unpopular in the beginning because, people are going to be like, I don't know if I can trust this, like the intrinsic value of it. Like when I go along the Silk Trade Road and I'm trading with other foreigners and then, they want the silver and gold and things like that, right? So it was actually unsuccessful. And so like they kind of stopped printing that for a while until much centuries later. But then here's the big one is spirit money. Have you all heard of spirit money? So actually, I grew up with spirit money. My grandmother actually owned a shop that sells paper goods for the dead. And so people would come and buy basically paper replica. It's like replicas of what you would use in your own living world, like money, a house, horses made out of paper, kitchenware, things like that. And so she would sell them. But I found some sources where like during Tai Long time, people were saying, oh, if you buy spirit money, like they could pay in the hells. And there's a story that goes wildfire actually, where like he decides to burn spirit money from his mom. And during the funeral, his mom comes back alive. And she said, because of your paper money, I was able to give it to the underworld god, and he released me, like I paid back for my life. And then the story goes wild. And so I do think like it, I always wondered, is this like a way to market or advertise for more paper goods? But like I always find this is like the best stories, like little secrets here and there. But yeah, so paper was a secret invention. Actually, China held on to the secret of paper making for centuries. Like, for instance, like they started making more paper by the first, second century. Then Central Asia got it, and Middle East, it wasn't until by like maybe the 7th or 8th century. Europe, they would actually be producing paper by the 11th to 13th century. So China held it the longest. Reasons. Hereditary craft guilds. Paper making was a secret. It was restricted. Only specific families and guilds and professional groups had access to that. And it becomes a state level craft. So you mentioned about the palaces, like, yeah, emperors, court officials really held that. In fact, they even stated specific ingredients for specific uses, right? So it's strategic resource. So those who can control a way to provide and disseminate knowledge holds power. So the thing is, paper, just because it was held as a secret does not mean that people weren't aware of it. I think a lot of civilizations and cultures were experimenting regardless. It's just the way China was able to process it. So while they would export it, the secrecy was kept hidden. So it made people think like, how is this working? It was also used for diplomatic exchanges. Later on, Korea and Japan would later on was able to make their own paper too. And in fact, Korea ended up becoming one of the leading productions in which their paper was so well refined and beautiful that even the royal family in China, when they were received it as gift, it would only stay within imperial uses. So you can kind of see how that dynamic paper as a power object almost. There's a lot of agency that paper has created over time. So this chart over here, I got it from one of the research papers of some scholars. And this is just a quick, brief timeline of how paper used between China and the Western world. Like you can kind of see that paper manufacturing begins in Europe in the 12th century. And then the first paper mill in the US is 1690. Here it says the first newspaper was printed in the US in 1705, but if I am not wrong, I think it was also printed actually in 1690 along with the first paper mill. So yeah, so in Europe around this point in time, writing relied on very costly and heavy materials still. So the writing platforms are clay tablets, wax tablets. Greek and Roman world were using a lot of wax tablets actually. The papyrus from Egypt, parchment, and vellum. But this is the paper ancestors in Europe. So here's papyrus. Like I mentioned earlier, they are paper-like, but they're actually very different, is that because of the way it's structured. So similar process, they do get harvested. The inside, the pith of the papyrus is actually pulled out too. But what it does is that they're thin layer, they're actually a layer on top of each other, side by side, and then crisscross in a way. And then they're hammered down to press it down, and then it latches on as it also dries. But it's not, they're not beaten to a pulp and then suspended to water. So that's a huge difference right there. So in a way, slightly, it's kind of, I don't know how the best way to describe it. It's almost like it's laminated in a way. Yeah. So papyrus was even made before paper. It was used for the longest time as a writing tool in Egypt. Then they traded with other civilizations. And papyrus was also a secret invention of the Egyptians for a while.
So the Chinese would have been aware of papyrus as an object.
That's a good one. I'm actually not sure if they were aware of papyrus, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was through the Silk Trade Road. But I haven't really seen a lot of it. Yeah. I know the Byzantine Empire, I thought they would like be the one to start paper production the earliest too, as Central Asia and the Middle East was getting access to it. But I think they really stuck with parchment and vellum the most even. Yeah. So here's another illustration. Sorry, it's not as clear. But you can kind of see how they're layering it side by side and then kind of crisscross. Then they will hammer it down. Also very labor intensive. This map here actually shows a little bit of like how it travels. So like China does trade with like Southeast Asia and their other East Asian counterparts, and as well as Tibet. Tibet also grabs it first. But the big one is actually, this is also another story that people are still finding on the primary sources, is that China, Tibet, and the Islamic world actually went into quite a few battles. So the Battle of Halab. So right over here is just another painting depictions when the Arabs and the Chinese went against each other. The story is, we kind of see this is just their routes. The major battle of Talas was basically saying that at some point in that battle, Arabs actually captured a bunch of Chinese prisoners. And amongst those prisoners were paper makers. And so they were chatting it out somehow. It's like, you tell me your secret. The Chinese, according to the story, they're like, we'll tell you our secret. And so that is a story about like how they started paper making. However, once again, we find other archaeological materials and artifacts that, you know, the Islamic world was already kind of making paper, but through their interactions through the Silk Trade Road and with China and Tibet, they were able to refine the process. And what kind of evolutionized it was that they became the front runners in making really good rag paper. So they break down and recycle their textile materials, cotton, linen, and then make it also pretty smooth and very durable. And eventually that leads them to make their first major paper mill in Iraq. And later on, it just starts spreading back to Egypt, North Africa, and then into Europe. So that's the story right there. And then there's like a lot of historians rebelling with the primary sources, like for instance, in some accounts from the Islamic world side, they were like, we're fighting against 50,000 Chinese people. And, you know, and then Chinese accounts are like, we only sent 30,000 people. So it's really interesting. But global encounters in a way, right? And then that's paper spreading. And so then we actually have these Arabs actually created like they're also their manual guides and also illustrations of them making paper, and they will end up using it also for record keeping, their artworks, and so forth.
So what year was that?
This one, is around, I remember I have it in my notes somewhere. I can tell you, but it's around the 6th century, 6th and 7th century.
So that's with the spread of Islam.
Yeah. And then I think by the 800s, so 9th century, they were already really making a lot of paper by then. So like China for the longest time, especially after the Han and Tang Dynasty, they had the most world production of books and paper. Then the Islamic Empire later on became pretty much rival the amount of productions of paper. And then by the 1500s, Europe will catch on and also produce so much paper and books, especially with the Gutenberg press invention.
So back to the previous slide. there
Yes.
was, illumination with gold leaf
Yes.
back then.
Yes, yeah. Gold leaves is actually also another major art form. Yeah, and I basically Asia and the Middle East also use it a lot in their materials. Actually, I'm gonna eat ice cream in Japan with gold leaf. I'm gonna try that. We'll see how it goes. It's edible, apparently. With the spread of paper though, like people are once again are jotting down their memories, their record keeping. So this is actually one of my favorite ones because this scholar, Fiddle in the Middle East, he was trying to map out his surroundings. So this is one of the early maps around the world that he's trying to perceive. So then this is like how he was like kind of situating other world like countries, like there's China, Russia, continental, Egypt, the Nile, but like Egypt and then the Nile's all the way up. So like it's like what I find interesting with these paper, it tells all these little stories on the side. So I think it's a really great medium because the idea of it was to make it more accessible. So once again, we're gonna now approach Europe. So the corner right over there is parchment. What is parchment and vellum made out of?
Skins.
Skins. So we have an example right over here. You're welcome to take a look at later. So it's made out of skin. What kind of skins?
Goat.
Goats, cows, yeah. So you're all correct, animal skin. The primary difference between the two is vellum is just fancier. It's actually used on more young animals. So baby animals. And the thing is, parchment and vellum are very long lasting too. They absorb ink really well. They're very durable and they're very versatile. So like it is a very popular medium. The hard part is like once again it's very time consuming too. And there's only so many pages you can create from an animal's skin. So there's definitely some limitations. So they're often reserved for important manuscripts, legal documents, and also religious texts. Very gorgeous though. Like those, oh my gosh, like some of the manuscripts that I see that the British Library has like digitized, gorgeous. And it's all handmade and hand painted too. Our Constitution is also made out of animal skin. So it's, may it last long. But things that happens on parchment and vellum too is that, like actually when they do cut the skin and they have to actually stretch it, also dry and do other things to it, sometimes, during the production, a hole might appear. So that's things that you can find in parchment. Also follicles of, yeah.
Sarah, it's pretty, people using human skin.
So yes, there is. There has been books made of human skin. I can't remember on the top of my head where they're currently located. I think there is a university that's tracking them down. I forgot, but if you're interested, we can touch base and I can definitely provide that. I think people are still looking into it just because I heard that you might not notice it at first and then have to do a little digging.
Yeah.
How
His question.
About what time period?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what time period. The ones that I've heard about is around like also 18th century, maybe 19th century. Don't quote, like I'm not 100% sure. So I don't know about earlier ones before that, but the ones I've come across in like just reading articles, I remember it was like 1800s, maybe like 1700s. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, that has happened before. But yeah, you can actually see follicles, like hair follicles, dots on parchment. But yeah, they're very long lasting too. So once again, this is just to kind of wrap up this part, is that through the Silk Road, Central Asia, Middle East, Europe will eventually be introduced to paper. So once again, by the 15th century, 16th century, paper had become more widely circulated. And once again, paper mills will start popping up in North America in 1690. Germany becomes also a major area. When it reaches to Europe, I think one of the biggest one is actually Spain producing paper, and then Italy, and it jumps to England and Germany. But this is a paper mill in Germany, and one of the funny things that I read is through this one decree where the major cities pushing the paper mills out. They're like, okay, you can't be in the city. It's too loud. It's too much going on. So they started going further out on the outskirts of cities. Obviously, closer to the water makes it better. But I was like, wow, did it really look like this? Like a fortress. But yeah, so paper mills become very essential. And eventually in 1789, we'll have someone who tries, especially as we go into the Industrial Revolution period, people will start thinking about how do I make this process easier, right? So we'll have people looking into paper making machine. So here's once again to have pulp and then releasing the water and then pushing the pulp through on these wire screens and then rolling it. They actually try to put the belt through one of the roll press so that it could soak up more water as it goes through and it flattens out. So this is the concept for it. And this is the Rittenhouse. Basically in 1690, William Rittenhouse, he establishes the first paper mill in America. And one of the things that I'm slowly going into a rabbit hole myself is trying to see what paper mills were in Loudoun County and the surrounding regions. I kind of want to know what the paper culture was like here too. I will say that I've been hitting a few walls and I haven't gone as deep enough, and I'm probably not going to the right places to find these primary sources. But I'm really interested to know more. But Pennsylvania was a huge paper production state. And during the Revolutionary War, I believe that paper makers did not have to go to war, they have to stay and make paper so that we could record what was happening the war. One of the sources that I'm also trying to find is using Virginia Chronicle and try to track down rag papers, because up until maybe the 1850s, we're still using what China, Central Asia, Middle East, and Europe was using is basically cotton, linen are very good. Has good fiber to make paper. We don't actually use wood pulp until much later on. And so people, are actually putting calls on advertisements being like, give me your rags. The cleaner, the better, so that we can make paper. So that's one thing. And we do have some examples of paper as made from rags in our archives collection. So if you ever want to see it, please let us know. Some of them are kind of large, so I wasn't able to bring it down. But yeah, so it's something that I think is fascinating. It won't be part of this presentation, but hopefully we'll find more. But that leads us to part 2, which is understanding it as a medium now. So that's kind of the trail and the history part. But now it's let's talk about its structure and how to preserve it, because as you can see, it has evolved quite a lot with different ingredients, different regions have different materials. But before that, any questions from part 1 so far? Okay. So for paper as a medium, this is actually like an X-ray scan, so you can see the fibers. So cellulose, right? They're just basically fiber chains. But I'm going to take us back to science because I had to remind myself. So plant, we need to know about its cells, right? The cell walls, and within the cell walls, when you're stripping it, what you're trying to get to is the cellulose fibers. And then when you break them down to the pulp and you're putting them back together, it's the chain. The longer the fibers are, the better. The brittle ones is when it's short chain, so it's easier to break down. So that's what happens with wood pulp, which we'll learn. So think of this as just an example of like, look how pretty the fibers are. They can be turned into a lot of different things. But here is a pulp mill right over here in Florida, and it actually is wood pulp. So around 18, so I've seen sources that say that wood has always been, so people have experimented with wood, but in 1801, more of it was being used. But then I think by 1850-ish, a lot of wood pulp was being used. And the thing with wood pulp is that through the Industrial Revolution too, and it's just a lot of additions of like other chemicals that, and there's more acid, more lignin. So basically it breaks down faster. Well, wood pulp, you have maybe 40 to 50% cellulose fibers. So the chains are actually shorter. But with rags, cotton, and linen, it's 90%. That's why paper from 500 years ago lasts so much longer than paper today. And you can kind of see it with our newspapers today, 20th century. They're much more acidic. But key things to know, it lasts longer when strong fibers like cotton and linen compared to wood pulp. But the thing is, the side with the wood pulp is that it's cheaper, it's cost effectiveness, and then it's just faster also with the time. So that's the reason why we used it a lot after at some point in the 19th century on. But the biggest reason is that in wood pulp is acid. So acid is the biggest reason for paper breakdowns. It eats away at the cellulose. And as it deteriorates, it makes it more brittle. Ink no longer latches on. And so all these things, like it's internally breaking down. And also on top of that, you have other external factors, right? To age the paper, like light. Light actually damages it. Kind of like, like I'm staying too much in the sun and I'm like, and I'm not using my sunscreen, but you can't put sunscreen on paper. So things like that. Other conditions like humidity, moisture, that causes issues because it could cause mold to grow. And you don't want that because mold will break it down even faster as well. But you can slow the damage if you know more about the paper that you have. And you can try to buffer it with acid-free folders. You're storing it in better conditions, like cooler climate, things like that. Key things too about paper. One of the library institutions and university, I believe one of them is University of Iowa. I might double check on that. But one of the things that they did was they actually, remember that first image where I show like all the stacks of paper from like 14th century to 19th century? They did a test on all of those papers. And you can see like, for instance, 1500s, they had high calcium and gelatin content. And as you go further to the 1900s, it's slowly dwindling. Just like us, we need calcium. so I was just like, oh no, the paper, organic matter, they have a lifespan to it too. Nothing is permanent, everything's impermanent, right? So our objects, and we just do our best to keep it as long as possible. This is an example of wood pulp, very brittle paper right over here. So ages, deteriorates, it falls apart really easily. This type of paper, I don't know if you've come across it, but as you turn the page on the sides, it just starts like crinkling and then just breaks off. It's really rough. And so then our instinct is to tape it, right? Our instinct is to do something to it. But tape actually does more damage. So adhesiveness, some of our tapes also cause more acid to it. I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word acid a lot. Key things. But it makes it brittle, it deteriorates, and it just falls apart. And so one of the things that we also invented is lamination, which is actually terrible for paper. So when you laminate something, try to avoid it as much as possible. Don't laminate things. Once you laminate, you're not going to be able to get it back. My colleagues have, in the past have tried to take lamination off of paper before. It just dies. What it does is that as being in its sealed space, eventually the cellulose will break down thing starts yellowing, it's like basically the paper is being eaten up, so it doesn't really survive. So lamination is really like a very temporary thing for temporary materials. So definitely don't do that for any of documents that you want to preserve long. Things like, well, yeah, mentioned other tapes and adhesive. There are Japanese rice tape. If you need to tape anything, I highly recommend that instead, because it's not an adhesive that has acid and it doesn't break down, and it's easily removable. So what we try to do when we try to preserve these things is like, don't do anything that's permanent to it. That's the key thing.
So Japanese, what tape?
Yeah, so Japanese paper, Japanese paper, Japanese rice tape. Yeah. Another thing is like glue is actually really damaging, but like starch paste, flour paste of some sort, like rice paste it does the least amount of damage. Yeah, it's like it doesn't break down the thing, like our regular tape, like Scotch tape would do. So, but ideally, no glue, no tape as much as possible. Here's an example right over here. You can kind of see that yellowing. It's literally eating the paper. Other things, metal. So chemical reactions, paper, organic matter or not organic matter, we off gas. we interact in any way. So metal, it rusts, it sticks on, it damages the paper too. So we also recommend don't use any paper.
So
metal.
how do you keep papers together after you've taken the paper clips off?
We have these plastic paper clips. It's best not to even do that if you can avoid it. You can kind of just keep them together in a folder, like an acid-free folder, to kind of keep them together to say that this is actually, a part of a thing, a unit. And then if suddenly there's a series to it and you want to keep in the same folder, then the next one is there's these little plastic paper clips that are not too damaging, and then you can also do that. But the best is try not to even.
Not to use it.
Yeah.
So you take out paper clips and you take that out when you find it, because I have some papers that have used a straight pin, like a sewing straight pin, to keep them together.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they're pretty old. They're back in the 1800s.
Are they also metal too, or are they
The
just?
pins are metal, and they're, we get that.
Yeah. So it would be best to like take the metal off. Yeah. They kind of, as you
So order more of the acid-free folders.
Yes, acid-free folders, acid-free boxes.
That's an acid-free box.
Yeah, that's an acid-free.
So, yeah, but any plastic, I mean, we have plastic layers. It's not, it's not laminated, but it's paper between two pieces of plastic.
Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. Is it like Mylar? Like,
yes.
that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. So sometimes like we have paper that are very fragile, it's tearing up. We put them in those Mylar sleeves to kind of hold it in place, but it's not sealed or anything. Yeah.
Where can you find those materials?
Yes, so we do have websites like so you can actually find it on Amazon too. And you just make sure make sure it says acid free, no lignin, things like that. Gaylord also is a really good website, and there's one called Conservation Resources.
We've been using Holland.
Oh, yeah. Holland's also one. Yeah. So the key thing is making sure that when you look at, I guess, the description, make sure it does say acid free. Like technically our computer papers, when we print off, they say like it's pretty much acid free today, but because you can't really confirm that, plus like how it was being made or processed or the machinery, things like that could get into the materials, so we avoid that too. So we strategically go after any archival places that sell the materials, because I keep that in mind, how it's being processed. So this is a zoom up close look of how damaging metal can be. Mold is another one. It's my favorite. It's my best friend. So humidity actually, or dampness, water damage can cause mold to grow. And mold can grow on paper as well as parchment and vellum too. Um, and they spread pretty fast. And then one of the things about mold that's really hard is that it's really hard to get rid of it. If it starts, spores will start spreading, and it could attract a lot of things. It gives off a really musty scent, and critters, when they smell something, they're curious. They might come and they're like, "Oh, paper! I'm gonna eat it too." So we try to be careful of that. So you want to keep it in a cool, control climate. Another thing with mold too is because they're really hard to get rid of, sometimes like one of the best things to do is based on what resources you have is really to keep it dormant. So you want to put it to sleep and not spread even. And then when it gets hit with any other external situation, it might wake it up. So that's the reason why mold is very tricky.
How do you deal with?
So freezing it. So not everything can go in the freezer, like photographs or negatives or something like that. But for books, you can put it into the freezer at a specific temperature and try to like either kill it off or put it to sleep. And after that, you will kind of isolate it, kind of check on it. And there will be key visual aids that kind of tell you that it's kind of like not spreading, not like fully alive and awake. And then from there on, what you do is you try to manage it. Like you're going to manage the symptoms. Yeah.
So you don't wipe it. You don't try to wipe it off.
So that's hard because if you wipe it, you might spread it. Yeah.
So if it's like a larger mold issue, like can you contact the library or other professionals?
Yeah, there are definitely resources. There are treatment companies, like conservation, people who does conservations, and also preservationist specialists that can definitely give really good tips and advice and can actually maybe take in your material and work with it. So yeah, anyway, arch nemesis. So we try not to have the humidity exceed 65%. A lower is better. Yeah, so it does digest organic matter, which is why it's bad for paper. It weakens the fiber, weakens the structure, and so forth, and it can attract other paper lovers. So critters is another issue. We have, if it's too moist, if the water damage and moisture and mold, it also attracts silverfish. Silverfish loves moisture. We also have cockroaches. They also really like paper, as well as termites. In fact, in one of these, I was looking at it, they have these little trails like this. Most likely, yeah, most likely chewed by termites. So they have something in common with us. They like paper. So storage for archival materials, like we kind of briefly touched base on. So archival boxes, folders, and sleeves. And so kind of like that. So if you have things that are like originally staple or meant to be together, you can folder them together. Once you put them in this boxes, then once again, you put it in a place that's cooler. We do that for a lot of our materials. We also do that for our photographs as well. Oversized materials.
Oh.
So we are very tempted to fold things. Folding is actually pretty bad on the paper. It's like straining it. So what happens is you keep folding it and unfolding it. Where the creases are, it becomes brittle over time. So it does break eventually. But what we highly suggest is rolling the items. And then you can also get an archival tube to put the rolled materials in. If you want to unroll it, it's best to not force it. Once again, straining materials, like we have these maps too, or small documents. And I know I said don't do humidity, but there is a humidification process that you can do slightly to kind of like unroll it to give it a little bit a natural push so that it's not so tight. And then you pull it out and you can unroll it better. Yeah.
So Tammy, with these tips, would you recommend seeing consulting a paper conservator first before trying these on your own?
So for this one, you can, I guess it's based on visually how you're seeing your paper. If you feel like there's a lot of damage and it's really tight and it's not budging naturally, then you should definitely maybe reach out to a specialist just in case you don't want to further damage it. Because sometimes if it's like, for instance, example, if it's rolled really tightly, you might not see what's internally inside as you're pulling it apart. It might tear. So yeah, so if I feel like when you hold something with your five senses, your sense of touch, you might be able to feel that strain factor, and maybe that might give you a moment to pause and be like, should I continue? So that's what I would say. That's the same with other paper-based materials, even paintings, other objects that have endured a lot. But yeah, so that's kind of like the end of my presentation. These are some resources. The Library of Congress has really good preservation, care, and handling resources. They have, there's also some from the Smithsonian and other conservation institutes. So if you're interested, you can email us and I can provide those links and materials. And these are some of the literature reviews that I've done about just following paper that I had fun with. But yeah, thank you. I apologize for talking very fast, so.
We have old library. This is the Goose Creek meeting up in Lincoln, and we have books that go back to the 1700s. And you didn't cover something called foxing. When you first got this off the shelf, everyone said it's moldy, but it wasn't moldy, it was foxing.
Yeah.
Does that deteriorate with time, or do we just keep those books closed up?
No, I think maintaining the climate for that foxing is, it is a sign of the paper aging. And I actually have a sheet that I can email to you of just like managing it. I guess there's like a moment where it becomes serious and a moment where I think it's just managing it. It's just like the aging of the paper. Yeah. It's unless, I think mold would be the other, the issue.
We don't have any mold.
Yeah.
And it's just the foxing, but these are really old books.
Yeah. And it's very common to see foxing. Like even modern books, you can see foxing pretty common too. Yeah.
What is that? I'm curious.
Oh, so it's like they're like these brown spots that is just like sunspots on paper. They're kind of like that. Yeah.
Also, with our books, we've been covering them with plastic so that the binding stays stable, and it's not taped to the books, but it's just loose over the books.
That's okay. I think if they're Mylar sheets, that's okay.
Mylar.
Yeah, there's also a conservation website actually sells those too to have like kind of wrap around the book. That's okay.
And also we have minutes that we've been reading, and the paper is very thin. And the first couple of pages have deteriorated a lot, and I don't know how to stabilize that.
Yeah, that's hard. How often are you using those minutes?
Well, we're transcribing them.
Okay.
So we're opening the book up, and they're in there.
Yeah.
They're stable in the front of the.
Yeah.
We're about halfway through.
So because it's a book with the paper structure too, it could also be the stress on the spine. Do you all have something like underneath the front cover to kind of?
Yes.
So I would say because you're transcribing it and doing something with it, just be very careful. But then once you, another option, are you digitizing anything?
Yes. Yeah. That's what we're doing. We're transcribing it, typing it, and it's all digital.
Yeah. And another option too is based on how much treatment or conservation you want to do. You can also check with a specialist to see if rebinding it is something that you would want to consider.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah. And then sometimes it's a question of how much do you want to keep the original, like, yeah.
We're planning to keep a copy in our library and sending the original to Swarthmore, which
Oh,
is
okay.
our repository.
Nice.
There's my question. Have you spent Thanksgiving librarians at Swarthmore about this?
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
because they're really quite good with it. I know I used to live in Swarthmore, so.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. They're the ones who get all of our minutes and
Yeah.
everything, but, it's, we found that paper just catches your attention there. And, people, there's so much information digitally
Yeah.
that the paper in our standing office really has meaning.
Yeah.
And people can refer to it. They don't have to go someplace else.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to keep a copy there and send the originals.
Yeah, I think that's good to be able to make that copy.
So I have a couple things. One, can you describe the difference between plastic and Mylar?
Oh, yeah. So that's a very good question. I'm not, let me see if I can do this right. I know that for Mylar, actually, I don't know how to describe it, the differences. There are certain plastics that I would avoid based on the way it's being processed, is how I should put it. And so the reason why I go with mylar sleeves, especially with conservation set, is because I think the way it's being processed, it's less, there might be less residues or less off gassing that might happen. And I can, if you would like, I can give you an email and we can discuss that more, so that I can provide the right information, the key differences, and maybe showing some links that would show more of the context of how it's being described. That's better for you. Yeah.
And then also, there was a comment about basements and attics.
Oh, yes.
And maybe not putting your papers in those spaces.
So, yes, that's a good one. So I think it depends on, so I've seen things stored in basements. The thing with basements is that moisture might get stuck there. Same with attic, it might be too humid or too hot. There's not enough air circulation. But I think it's like finding a key place in your home that has stable temperature environment that's generally cool and less light is good. Basement, one of the things that I noticed is like, I don't know, like how often you go into your basement, you might not notice like maybe a shift in the change of moisture and humidity or things like that, or just like dampness or like for me is like leaking issues. So that could damage things. So I think it's really it's more about like where you find that control environment. It's not necessarily like it has to be no basement or no attic per se, but it's just how the environment is being situated within those two places in your own home. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This has really helped a lot.
Thank you. Yeah, hopefully, yeah. But yeah, definitely feel free to message us at any time.
Yes. Yeah, are you here? Oh,
Yeah.